Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little darker, a time of plagues, punishments, and pottage. We're diving into what life was really like during the Middle Ages. Forget the castles and chivalry Hollywood sold you. The truth, you probably wouldn't last a single day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1325. The good news is you're alive. The bad news is so are the fleas. You find yourself lying in what can barely be described as a bed. It is a half-rotted straw mattress, stuffed not with hypoallergenic down or memory foam, but with bugs and hay. And it smells like a barn floor for a very good reason. It was a barn floor 3 months ago. There is absolutely no memory foam to cushion your spine, no pillows to cradle your head, and definitely no Egyptian cotton sheets to soothe your skin. Instead, you are wrapped in a single wool blanket. It hasn't been washed since last winter. By now, it likely weighs roughly as much as a small cow from the accumulated grime of daily use. It sits heavy on your chest, a damp, scratchy reminder of the hygiene standards you have left behind in the future. You blink awake, your eyes adjusting to the gloom as a sound cuts through the morning air. The church bell clangs in the distance. This is the medieval version of an alarm clock. Only, it is louder, more insistent, and somehow even less merciful than the digital chime you are used to. It demands you rise, not because you want to, but because the day has started, whether you are ready or not. You take a moment to look around your home. It is a wooden hut with one room. There are no windows to let in the morning light or offer a view of the countryside. It features a charming, open-concept floor plan, which means your family, your livestock, and the local domestic insects all share the exact same space. There are no walls to separate you from the animals, no doors to close against the noise of the household. And then, the smell hits you. Oh, it is a fragrant symphony. The air is thick with a subtle blend of stale beer, human sweat, and goat. Underlying it all is something you pray isn't mold, but know in your soul probably is. You might wish for something to mask the odor, but scented candles haven't been invented yet. And even if they were, they would just melt uselessly onto your dirt floor. You try to stretch your limbs, but you immediately regret it. The air inside the hut is freezing. Your joints ache with a deep, cold throb. In this reality, you are 22 years old, which in medieval terms is roughly middle-aged. Your spine creaks like an old wooden door as you attempt to sit up. Your knees sound like a bag of rocks being shaken by a confused peasant. Getting out of bed is a gamble in itself. You swing your legs over the side of the mattress and your feet touch the floor. It is either wet from last night's rain, which leaks freely through the thatched roof, or it is crusty from something your neighbor's chicken did. Either way, Your bare feet are now part of the ecosystem. And if you were hoping for a moment of solitude to collect your thoughts, you can forget about it. Privacy? What's that? Your entire family is waking up beside you. There might even be a random cousin who just never left. There is no bedroom to retreat to, no curtains to pull shut, no me time to be had, just communal everything. Welcome to morning in medieval Europe. It is a place where you are never truly alone because parasites, rodents, and 8 other people are always with you. You sit there, shivering in the damp air, listening to the livestock stir and the family groan awake. And this is just how your day starts. It only gets worse from here. So, you've managed to crawl out of your medieval haystack of horrors. Congrats. The cold air is slapping your face, your knees are popping, and your breath is misting in front of you like a tiny personal fog bank. But you don't have time to dwell on the misery of your joints, because now nature calls. And in the Middle Ages, nature doesn't call politely. It screams. Here is the part where you really, truly start missing the modern bathroom. You are used to a private, tiled sanctuary with a locking door, a ventilation fan, and a flush mechanism that whisks your problems away into a magical underground network. In 1325, that concept is as alien as space travel. There is no toilet, no seat, no toilet paper, no flush, not even a plunger in the corner to offer silent moral support. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is an adventure, a social experiment, and often a small public event. If you are a peasant, which, statistically speaking, you are, your bathroom is likely a wooden bucket or an earthenware pot kept in the corner of the room or just behind the house. It's called a chamber pot, or a jerry, or simply the pot. And because you slept through the night while your family digested yesterday's pottage, that pot is already full. Uncle Wolfston had a rough night after eating bad turnips, and the evidence is right there, unsealed and waiting for you. The smell is biblical. It is a dense, physical force that greets you the moment you lean over the rim. It mixes with the wood smoke and the damp wool of your tunic to create an aroma that would make a modern sanitation worker weep. You hold your breath, squinting against the sting in your eyes, and do your business as quickly as possible, hoping the cold draft coming through the walls doesn't freeze anything sensitive. Once you are finished, you are faced with the next logistical nightmare: disposal. You can't just flush. You have to physically relocate this waste. You pick up the bucket. It's heavy, sloshing dangerously, and waddle toward the door or the window. Now here's the kicker. In many crowded medieval towns, the accepted method of disposal was simply gravity. You toss it into the street. Yes, the street. The same place where you walk, where children play, and where the baker sells his bread. There is a mainstream historical fact that has become a cliché, but it is rooted in truth. The cry of "Garde-à-l'eau." This is a corruption of the French phrase "Regardez l'eau," watch out for the water. You are supposed to shout this warning before you upend your bucket out the window, giving the poor souls below a sporting chance to dodge the cascading filth. You lean out the window. The street below is narrow, shadowed, and already slick with mud. You shout, "Gardaloo," although frankly, no one ever moves fast enough. A stray dog looks up, confused. A neighbor trudging by pulls his cloak tighter. You tip the bucket, splash. You have just contributed to the ecosystem of the medieval street. These streets are effectively open sewers. There is a central gutter, or kennel, running down the middle of the road, meant to carry rainwater and waste away to the nearest river. But the system relies on rain. If it hasn't rained in a while, the gutter is just a stagnant, slow-moving river of human waste, animal droppings, butcher's offal, and mystery liquids you'd rather not examine. Historians still argue about exactly how filthy medieval cities really were. Some scholars point to strict municipal laws in places like London and Paris that imposed heavy fines for dumping waste in the wrong place, suggesting that medieval people actually cared deeply about hygiene and tried hard to keep the streets clean. Others argue that the sheer volume of complaints and court records about dung heaps blocking the roads suggests that while the laws existed, nobody paid any attention to them until the smell became unbearable. You pull your head back inside, escaping the street stench for the slightly less offensive house stench. But what if you're out and about when the urge strikes? If you are lucky enough to live in a town with public latrines, congratulations. You get to experience the height of communal living. Public latrines are often built on bridges over rivers or perched over large cesspits. You walk in and you find a long wooden bench with holes cut into it. There are no stalls. There are no dividers. You sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers, hiking up your tunic, exposing your pale, shivering legs to the world. Privacy is a myth. Ventilation is a cruel joke. You sit there, doing your business, while the person next to you strikes up a conversation about the price of barley or the local lord's gout. It is the ultimate equalizer. A merchant sits next to a beggar, and for a few minutes, they are just two men trying not to fall into a hole. And speaking of falling, the danger is real. The wood rots. The floors get slippery. There are recorded instances of people falling into cesspits and drowning in the muck. It is a horrible, suffocating, undignified way to go, but it happens. You grip the edge of the bench tight, your knuckles white. You do not want to be a statistic. Now let's address the elephant in the room: wiping. Toilet paper won't be invented for centuries, so what do you use? You reach for the available options. If you are wealthy, you might use a scrap of wool or a piece of linen cloth. But you aren't wealthy. You are a peasant, so you use what nature provides. Straw is a popular choice, though it's scratchy. Leaves are good if it's summer. Moss is the premium option, soft, absorbent, and readily available in the damp climate. But often you use a gomp stick or a sponge on a stick if you're in a more Roman-influenced area, or simply a handful of hay. Sometimes, if you are in a rush, you use nothing at all, which might explain why handshakes weren't popular yet. People bowed. It was safer. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about a specific tool found in some medieval latrines, the arse wisp. Archaeologists have found small bundles of moss and hay tied together with twine, specifically designed for personal cleaning. It was essentially a disposable, biodegradable wet wipe, minus the wet and the clean scent. You grab a handful of straw from the floor, grimace, and do what needs to be done. It is rough. It is unpleasant. It leaves you feeling less clean and more abraded. If you were a noble living in a castle, you might think you'd have it better. And sort of, you would. You would have a garderobe. This is a small room built into the thickness of the castle wall, with a hole that opens directly over the moat or a pit outside. It sounds fancy, but consider the mechanics. You are sitting on a stone or wooden seat suspended over 100-foot drop. The wind whistles up the chute, creating a freezing updraft that targets your most vulnerable areas. In the winter, the draft can be so strong it feels like the castle is trying to blow you back off the seat. And there is a security risk. Great warriors and kings didn't just worry about arrows, they worried about invaders climbing up the toilet. There are historical accounts of sieges being broken because a daring soldier crawled up the waist chute of the garderobe and stabbed the king while he was occupied. Talk about entering through the back door. So whether you are a farmer squatting over a bucket or a baron shivering in a stone closet, medieval toileting is a humiliation ritual. It is cold, it is public, it is dangerous, and it is never, ever not disgusting. You finish up, you rearrange your layers of wool. You try to ignore the fact that you definitely didn't get completely clean. You step carefully across the floor. One slip on a wet stone path or a misplaced step near the bucket, and you are face first in humanity's leftovers. You wash your hands? Maybe, if there's water left in the jug. You splash a little on your fingers, wipe them on your tunic, and call it good. Germ theory is hundreds of years away. As far as you know, you're just washing off bad humors. You leave the latrine area, feeling lighter but not necessarily fresher. You have survived the most dangerous part of the morning. But now, as the adrenaline of the bucket toss fades, you realize something else. Your stomach is making a sound like a dying bagpipe. You are starving. You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast, something warm, delicious, comforting. But as you head back toward the hearth, you remember where you are. This is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. And what awaits you in the kitchen is going to test your will to live almost as much as the chamber pot did. You survived the toilet. You deserve a reward, right? Maybe a nice breakfast. Something warm, delicious, comforting to settle your stomach after the olfactory assault of the chamber pot. But as you head back toward the hearth, clutching your stomach, you remember where you are. This is medieval Europe. Nothing is comforting here. And what awaits you in the kitchen is going to test your will to live almost as much as the latrine did. Let's set expectations. In your modern life, breakfast is a sanctuary. It's the smell of brewing coffee, the sizzle of bacon, the pop of a toaster. Maybe you have some avocado toast or a smoothie bowl. In 1325, breakfast is less of a culinary event and more of a tactical refueling operation designed to keep you from collapsing before noon. You sit down, or more likely, squat near the fire, since chairs are expensive furniture reserved for people who own land, and look at your meal. The centerpiece is pottage. If you are lucky, it is warm. If you are not, it is a room temperature sludge that has congealed overnight. Pottage is the backbone of the peasant diet. It is a thick, gloopy stew made of whatever was available. Grains like oats or barley, root vegetables like turnips and parsnips, and maybe a few field beans if the harvest was good. Here is the catch. This pottage has been simmering in the same iron pot for days, maybe weeks. It is a perpetual stew. You don't throw it out. You just add new ingredients on top of the old ones. That turnip you're eating might be fresh, but the broth it's floating in could be older than your relationship with the village blacksmith. It is less of a recipe and more of an ongoing edible experiment in fermentation and endurance. On the side, you have bread. But this isn't the fluffy, sliced white bread of the 21st century. This is a hunk of carbohydrates so dense it could deflect arrows. It is likely Maslin bread, made from a mixture of wheat and rye, or perhaps horse bread made from dried peas and beans ground into a coarse flour. In lean times, and let's be honest, it's almost always a lean time, this bread is bulked up with creative fillers. Sawdust, ground up acorns, or even clay might be mixed into the dough to make it stretch further. This loaf is not your friend. You don't slice it, you negotiate with it. You have to tear at it with your teeth, gnawing like a dog on a bone. And speaking of gnawing, there is a hidden danger in every bite: grit. Because the grain is ground between massive millstones, tiny fragments of stone chip off and end up in the flour. Every mouthful is a gamble. Will you get a smooth bite, or will you crunch down on a piece of rock that cracks a molar? This daily abrasion wears your teeth down flat over time, assuming they don't rot out first. But we'll get to the joys of medieval dentistry later. Now, you're thirsty. You reach for a drink. You are probably craving a glass of water, maybe some orange juice, or an oat milk latte. Instead, you are handed a mug of beer. Yes, beer, at 6:00 a.m. Before you get excited about the idea of a boozy breakfast, understand the context. You aren't drinking this to get a buzz. You are drinking it to survive. The local water source is likely the same river where the tanner washes his leather and your neighbor dumps his chamber pot. Drinking plain water is playing Russian roulette with your intestinal tract. So, you drink ale. But this isn't a double-hopped IPA. It is small beer. It has a very low alcohol content, just enough to kill off the worst of the bacteria, but not enough to get you drunk, unless you drink gallons of it, which you might. It is thick, cloudy, room temperature, and slightly sour. It tastes like liquid bread that gave up on its dreams. Even the children drink it. It is the Gatorade of the 14th century, providing hydration and a few extra calories to get you through the labor ahead. Mainstream historical fact: the average medieval peasant consumed a staggering amount of ale, by some estimates, a gallon a day per person. It was the primary source of hydration and a significant source of nutrition. Monks in monasteries were often allotted even more. It wasn't a party lifestyle, it was a caloric necessity in a world where burning 4,000 calories a day in the fields was standard. You sip your weak, chunky beer and chew your rock-hard bread. You look around for the rest of the breakfast spread. Where is the bacon, the eggs, the cheese? Dream on. Meat and dairy are luxury items. If you have a pig, you aren't eating it for breakfast. You are saving it for winter or selling it to pay your tithes. Eggs are for selling or for the lord of the manor. Cheese is made in the summer to last through the winter, and if you eat it all now, you'll starve in January. Most peasants operate on a near-vegetarian diet by necessity, not choice. You eat what you grow. Cabbage, onions, leeks, garlic. If you want flavor, you use mustard or maybe some garden herbs. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, or nutmeg are worth more than your entire house. A pinch of black pepper is a display of wealth so profound it would be like sprinkling diamond dust on your oatmeal today. Historians still argue about the water myth, the idea that medieval people never drank water because they knew it was unsafe. Some scholars argue that people did drink water from pristine wells or fast-flowing springs and simply preferred ale for the taste and energy. Others insist the risk of dysentery was so high that avoiding water was a conscious, survival-driven cultural norm. Sitting there with your mug of brown sludge, you decide you don't care about the academic debate. You just wish the ale wasn't lukewarm. There's a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval table manners that you should know. In some households, men and women ate separately. The men would eat first, consuming the best portions, while the women and children ate what was left near the hearth. It wasn't universal, but it was common enough to add a layer of social indignation to your culinary misery. If you are a woman in this scenario, not only is the food bad, but you also have to wait your turn to be disappointed. You finish your meal, your stomach feels heavy, filled with dense grain and liquid. It isn't a feeling of satisfaction, it's a feeling of ballast. You are weighed down, fueled up like a furnace with low-grade coal. The taste lingering in your mouth is a combination of sour yeast, onion, and grit. You run your tongue over your teeth, checking for chips. You seem to be intact. But there is no time to digest. The sun is fully up now. The bell has rung. The fields are waiting. Breakfast wasn't about enjoyment. It was about fueling the machine. And you are the machine. You stand up, wiping the crumbs from your mouth with the back of your hand because napkins don't exist. You are energized in a sluggish, heavy sort of way. You have consumed enough calories to swing a scythe or dig a ditch for the next 6 hours. Now, you have to get dressed for the job. And if you thought the food was rough, wait until you feel the fabric that is going to be rubbing against your skin for the rest of the day. You thought wool was cozy. You are about to learn the true meaning of the word itch. So, you've eaten your sad medieval breakfast, washed it down with weak beer, and now it's time to get dressed. Not that it'll help. In the modern world, you open a closet full of options. Cotton, polyester, denim, maybe some soft flannel. In the Middle Ages, your wardrobe consists of exactly one outfit. One. And it's likely the same outfit you've been wearing every day for months, possibly years. Let's start with the base layer. You reach for your undergarments. If you're a man, this might be braids, essentially baggy linen shorts held up with a drawstring. If you're lucky, you also have a linen undertunic or chemise. Linen is decent. It's made from flax. It's somewhat breathable, and it's easier to wash than wool. But here's the catch. You probably don't own a spare. So, unless you wash it while naked and wait for it to dry, you're wearing it until it disintegrates or walks away on its own. If you're a woman, there are no bras, no panties as we know them. You might wear a linen shift, but often undergarments are optional or simply non-existent. You are going commando under layers of scratchy, heavy fabric. Now comes the main event, wool. You pull on your tunic. It is made of rough spun wool, woven by your wife or mother on a loom that has seen better days. It is thick, heavy, and incredibly itchy. This isn't soft merino wool from a high-end outdoor store. This is the kind of wool that still has bits of straw, burrs, and maybe even sheep dung woven into the fibers. Shutterstock. The fabric is stiff. It chafes your neck, your wrists, and your sides. It doesn't drape. It hangs like a heavy curtain. And because dyes are expensive, it's probably a dull shade of brown, gray, or russet, the color of mud, sky, or dried blood. Over the tunic, you might wear a surcoat or a hood if it's cold. The hood is actually one of the more practical items. It covers your head and shoulders, protecting you from rain and wind. But it, too, is wool. Everything is wool. You are essentially a walking sheep, minus the lanolin, though honestly, the fabric might still be greasy. There is no such thing as seasonal fashion. There is just, wear this until it falls apart. In winter, you layer everything you own. In summer, you suffer, you sweat into the wool, which traps the moisture and the smell against your skin. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval sumptuary laws strictly dictated what people could wear based on their social class. Peasants were forbidden from wearing certain colors, like purple or bright red, expensive fabrics like silk or velvet, and even furs, except for humble ones like rabbit or cat. These laws weren't just about fashion police. They were about maintaining the social hierarchy. If a peasant dressed like a lord, the whole system might collapse. So, you are legally mandated to look poor. And let's talk about washing. There are no washing machines, no detergents with mountain spring scents, and absolutely no dry cleaners. Washing clothes is a massive, labor-intensive chore. You have to haul water from the river, heat it over a fire if you have fuel to spare, and scrub the heavy wool with lye soap made from wood ash and animal fat. It is harsh on the hands and hard on the fabric. Because it's so difficult, most people simply don't wash their outer garments. They spot clean the stains, mud, food, manure, and let the rest marinate. Your clothes are stiff with sweat, grease, and grime. They have a smell that is distinctively medieval, a mix of wet dog, smoke, and unwashed human. And don't get me started on shoes. If you are lucky enough to own shoes, they are made of simple, untreated leather. They are turn shoes, sewn inside out, and then flipped. They have thin soles that offer as much arch support as a banana peel. They are not waterproof. One step in a puddle, and you have wet, cold feet for the rest of the day. And given the state of medieval streets, see Section 2, that puddle is likely not just water. Most peasants, however, simply go barefoot in the summer. You walk through mud, dung, and sharp rocks. Your feet become calloused, cracked, and permanently stained. You develop peasant feet, wide, tough, and impervious to pain, but also prone to infection from every cut and scrape. But the worst part of getting dressed isn't the itchiness or the smell, it's the inhabitants. Your clothes are not just fabric, they are a habitat. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs live rent-free in the seams of your tunic. Everyone has them. Nobles, monks, children, everyone is a walking insect farm. You feel a prick on your side, a flea, you scratch, then an itch on your scalp, lice, you scratch again. The itching is constant. It is a low-level background noise to your existence. You will be scratching your armpit with a wooden spoon while chatting with the local priest, and he won't even bat an eye because he's scratching too. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval pest control. People sometimes wore flea furs or carried small pieces of fur to attract fleas away from their skin. The idea was that the fleas would jump onto the fur trap instead of biting you. Whether it worked is debatable, but it shows the desperation. And if you develop a rash from the chafing, the sweat, or the bug bites, too bad. There is no dermatologist, no hydrocortisone cream. You might slap some mud or a herbal poultice on it, but mostly, you just suffer. That rash will accompany you for the next 6 months like an unwanted sidekick. So you stand there, fully dressed in your itchy, smelly, bug-infested armor of wool. You pull on your thin leather boots or brace your bare feet against the cold dirt floor. You are ready. Ready to head outside and start working yourself to death. Because in the Middle Ages, your outfit isn't a statement of style. It's a uniform of survival, and it's time to clock in. Now that you're fully dressed in your ensemble of misery, itching wool, stiff leather, and a lively ecosystem of parasites, it's time to face the mirror. Except, you don't have a mirror. You have a bucket of water or a polished piece of metal if you're wealthy, which you aren't. But you don't need a reflection to know what's happening inside your mouth. You can feel it. In the modern world, a toothache is an annoyance that ends with a phone call and a drive to a sterile office with Novocaine and soft rock playing in the background. In the Middle Ages, a toothache is a survival event. It is a throbbing, relentless reminder that your skull is betraying you. You run your tongue over your teeth. They feel rough, worn down like river stones. This is the result of the bread we discussed earlier. The grit from the millstones acts as a daily sandpaper, grinding your enamel down until the sensitive dentin is exposed. By the time you are 25, your molars might be flat surfaces, susceptible to cracking with every bite of a hard crust. But the wear and tear is the least of your worries. The real enemy is rot. You feel a sharp, blinding pain in your lower jaw. It pulses with your heartbeat. You have a cavity, or perhaps an abscess. In your mind, you know exactly what is causing this. It isn't bacteria or sugar or plaque. It is a worm. There is a quirky fringe tidbit that dominated medieval dentistry, the belief in the tooth worm. People believed that a tiny, maggot-like creature lived inside the tooth, gnawing at the roots and causing the agony. It makes sense in a horrifying way. The pain feels alive. It burrows and bites. Treatments often focused on driving the worm out. You might inhale the smoke of burning henbane seeds, hoping the fumes would suffocate the beast and make it fall out of your mouth. In reality, the heat might have just burst the abscess, or the narcotic seeds dulled the pain, but the worm theory persisted for centuries. You consider your options. You could try a home remedy. A poultice of roasted garlic and pepper applied directly to the gum. It burns like fire, but the distraction is almost welcome. A rinse of vinegar and salt? Or perhaps you should go see a professional. But professional is a loose term. There are no dentists, there are physicians who study the stars and urine samples, but they consider manual labor, like pulling teeth, beneath their dignity. So the job falls to the barber surgeon. This is the man who cuts your hair, trims your beard, lances your boils, and amputates your limbs. His shop is easily identifiable by the bowl of blood in the window or a striped pole representing blood and bandages. You walk in. The air smells of singed hair and old blood. He sits you down on a low stool. There is no reclining chair. He peers into your mouth, his breath smelling of onions and ale. He taps the offending tooth with a metal instrument. You scream. He nods sagely. The tooth must come out. He reaches for his tools. They are made of iron, forged by the local blacksmith. They are not delicate. He picks up the dental pelican, a terrifying device named because it resembles a pelican's beak. It has a claw that hooks over the top of the tooth and a fulcrum that rests against your gum. It is a leverage machine designed to rip bone from bone. Mainstream historical fact: medieval dental extraction was incredibly dangerous and often resulted in jaw fractures. Without x-rays, the barber surgeon couldn't see the shape of the roots. If he twisted too hard, he could break the mandible. If the tooth shattered, he would have to dig the shards out with an elevator tool, essentially a small pry bar. And there was absolutely no anesthesia, no gas, no injection, maybe a swig of strong wine if he was feeling generous, or a piece of wood to bite down on so you didn't bite his fingers. The barber clamps the pelican onto your tooth. You grip the edges of the stool until your knuckles turn white. He doesn't count to 3. He just twists. The pain is white hot, blinding, and all-consuming. It feels like your head is being turned inside out. You hear a sickening crunch, the sound of the periodontal ligament tearing and the tooth breaking free from the jawbone. Blood fills your mouth, hot and metallic. He holds the tooth up triumphantly. It is black and rotten. He tosses it into a bucket, with dozens of others. But the extraction is only half the battle. Now you have an open wound in your mouth in a world without antibiotics. Infection is a constant specter. If the socket gets infected, the bacteria can spread to your blood, leading to sepsis. That toothache could easily be your cause of death next week. People died from dental work all the time. A simple extraction could lead to swelling that closed the throat or a fever that never broke. Historians still argue about the prevalence of tooth decay across different medieval classes. It was long believed that peasants had better teeth than nobles because they couldn't afford sugar. While it's true that the rich, like Queen Elizabeth I later on, had black teeth from sugar consumption, recent archaeological evidence shows that peasants suffered just as much, but from different causes. The carbohydrates in their bread broke down into sugars, and the lack of hygiene meant plaque ran rampant. Everyone, rich or poor, was rotting. You stumble out of the barber's shop, clutching a rag to your jaw to staunch the bleeding. The pain has shifted from a sharp spike to a dull, throbbing ache that radiates into your ear. Your face is swollen. You look like a chipmunk that lost a prize fight. And let's not forget the social impact. Halitosis, bad breath, is universal. Between the rotting teeth, the gum disease, scurvy is always a possibility in winter, and the diet of onions and garlic, everyone's breath could peel paint. Kissing is a risky endeavor, both olfactory and hygienically. Courtly love poetry talks about sweet breath, but that was likely a fantasy, or the result of chewing copious amounts of cardamom and cloves, which you can't afford. You spit a glob of blood into the mud. You have one less tooth now. You will have to chew on the other side, which puts more strain on those teeth, accelerating their wear. It is a domino effect of dental collapse. But there is no time to feel sorry for yourself. The sun is climbing higher. The pain in your jaw is just another sensation to be cataloged alongside the itching of the wool and the rumbling of your stomach. You have survived the morning ritual, the breakfast, the dressing, and the dentistry. Now, you have to actually earn your keep. The fields are waiting. The weeds don't care about your missing molar. You shove the bloody rag into your pocket, pick up your hoe, and head toward the edge of the village. The real work is about to begin. You have survived the morning gauntlet. You are fed, barely, dressed, scratchily, and legally freed from your rotten tooth, painfully. Now, you walk to the edge of the village where the houses give way to the open country. It is time to enter the open fields. In the modern world, we are used to square fields fenced off with wire or hedges. In 1325, the landscape looks like a giant patchwork quilt made by a giant with an obsession for long, thin strips. This is the ridge and furrow system. The land is divided into long, narrow sections called celions, curving slightly like an elongated S. Why the curve? Because that is the shape an ox team makes when it tries to turn around a heavy plow at the end of a row. You find your strip. It isn't necessarily next to your other strip. Your land is scattered all over the manor to ensure everyone gets a mix of good soil and rocky garbage. It's fair, in a way that makes everything twice as inconvenient. You pick up your tool. Maybe it's a hoe, maybe a scythe, or maybe you are guiding a plow. The work begins, and it does not stop. For the next 10 to 12 hours, you are a machine. You swing the scythe, swish, thud. You step, swish, thud. It is a rhythmic, hypnotic motion that uses every muscle in your body. Your shoulders burn. Your lower back tightens into a knot that will never fully unravel. Your hands, already calloused, develop fresh blisters that pop and weep into the wooden handle. There is no HR department to complain to about repetitive strain injury. There is only the reeve. This is a mainstream historical fact. The reeve was essentially the foreman of the manor, usually a peasant elected or forced by the villagers to supervise the work. He is one of you, but he works for the Lord. He carries a white stick as a badge of office, and he uses it to measure your work and occasionally to remind you to move faster. He is the original micromanager. He ensures you are fulfilling your week work, the mandatory labor you owe the Lord in exchange for the privilege of living in your hut. You aren't just working for your own dinner, you are working for the Lord's profit. You spend the best hours of the day on his domain lands, growing his wheat and his barley. Your own pathetic strip of land gets whatever energy you have left at twilight. The sun beats down. There is no shade in the open fields. You sweat through your wool tunic. The lanolin smell intensifies. The flies find you. They buzz around your eyes and crawl into your ears. You can't swat them away constantly because if you stop moving, the reeve looks over. You are thirsty, but you ration your small beer. You are hungry, but lunch is hours away. You enter a trance state, a field blindness, where the world narrows down to the patch of dirt in front of your feet. Historians still argue vigorously about the concept of peasant leisure. You might have seen viral posts claiming medieval peasants worked fewer hours than modern office workers because of all the saints' days and holidays. While it's true there were many religious holidays, up to 80 a year, the reality of the working day was different. During harvest or planting, you worked from dawn until dusk, 6 days a week. And time off usually meant mandatory church attendance, not a spa day. The idea of the happy, rested peasant is largely a myth constructed by people who have never tried to harvest wheat by hand for 3 weeks straight. Around midday, the church bell rings the Angelus. You stop. You straighten your spine, hearing the vertebrae crack. You eat a chunk of bread and cheese if you have it, sitting in the dirt. You look at your hands. They are stained brown with soil and green with plant juice. They look like roots. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about agricultural law that might worry you: gleaning. This was the practice where the poor, usually women, and the elderly were allowed to scour the fields after the harvest to pick up the dropped ears of grain. It sounds charitable, but it was strictly regulated. If you were able-bodied and caught gleaning instead of working a contracted job, you could be punished. The system was designed to force everyone into labor. There was no opting out. The afternoon stretches out, an eternity of heat and dust. You watch the sun move across the sky, a slow-motion timer counting down your life. You think about your house. It's cold, dark, and smelly, but right now, it seems like a palace because it has a place to sit down. Finally, the sun dips below the horizon. The light turns golden, then gray. The reeve nods. You are released. You shoulder your hoe. You walk back toward the village, your legs heavy as lead. You are exhausted in a way that modern gym-goers can only dream of. You have burned 4,000 calories today. You have moved tons of earth. You have fed the system. But as you trudge home, anticipating the warmth of your hearth, you remember the state of your house. You remember the gaps in the walls. You remember that while you were baking in the sun all day, your house was preparing its own thermal torture for you. You have survived the heat of the day. Now you have to survive the temperature of the night. And in a medieval house, the climate control is entirely up to the wind. You have survived the heat of the day. Now you have to survive the temperature of the night. And in a medieval house, the climate control is entirely up to the wind. If it is summer, your home is not a refuge. It is a clay oven. You walk inside, hoping for shade, but the mud walls have been soaking up the sun for 12 hours. They radiate heat back at you with a vengeance. There is no cross breeze because windows are structural weaknesses, so they are kept small and few. The air inside is stagnant, heavy with the smell of the animals you live with and the sweat of your entire family. You lie down on your straw pallet, sweating through your wool tunic because taking it off is not really an option due to the bugs. The heat is oppressive, thick, and unrelenting. It feels less like a room and more like the inside of a mouth. But summer is the easy season. Summer is just uncomfortable. Winter is the killer. Fast forward 6 months. The fields are frozen. The mud you walked through is now iron hard. You step into your house seeking warmth, but what you find is a draft that seems to have a personal vendetta against you. Your house is built of wattle and daub, woven sticks smeared with a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. It is a sturdy enough material, but it has a flaw. It shrinks and cracks when it dries or freezes. The wind finds every single one of these cracks. It whistles through the walls. It sneaks in under the thatched roof. It curls around your ankles like an icy snake. Mainstream historical fact. Most peasant homes in this period did not have chimneys. They had a central open hearth, a fire pit in the middle of the floor. The smoke was supposed to drift up and out through a hole in the roof or seep through the thatch. In reality, the smoke often just hung in the room, forming a choking gray cloud that hovered at eye level. You spend your winters in a state of semi-permanent respiratory distress, your lungs coated in soot, your eyes perpetually watering. It is a choice between freezing to death or being slowly smoked like a ham. You huddle near the fire. This is the only heat source you have. If you move 3 feet away, the temperature drops 20 degrees. Your front is roasting. Your back is freezing. You are a human rotisserie chicken, turning slowly to cook evenly. And you are not alone in your quest for warmth. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval heating. Living radiators. Peasants often brought their livestock inside the house for the winter. Not just the dog or the cat, but the cows, the goats, and the pigs. A cow generates a massive amount of body heat, about the same as a 1,000-watt heater. Having a cow in your living room wasn't just about protecting the animal from the cold, it was about stealing its warmth. Sure, the smell was atrocious, and you might wake up with a goat standing on your chest, but at least you weren't hypothermic. Historians still argue about the prevalence of turf insulation in different regions. Some evidence suggests that in the harshest climates, peasants would stack blocks of turf or sod against the exterior walls of their timber houses to add an extra layer of thermal protection, essentially burying their homes in dirt. Others argue this would have rotted the wood too quickly. You, looking at the frost forming on the inside of your wall, wish you had some turf right now. You'd stack it on your own face if it helped. The night deepens, the fire burns down to embers. Fuel is expensive and labor-intensive to gather, so you can't keep a roaring blaze going all night. You have to bank the fire, covering the coals with ash to keep them smoldering until morning. Now comes the sleeping arrangement. You don't have your own bed. You pile onto the family mattress, that same straw sack we met this morning. You sleep in a puppy pile with your parents, your siblings, your grandparents, and maybe that random cousin. It is a tangled mass of limbs and wool. It is not about affection. It is about survival thermodynamics. You share body heat because if you sleep alone, you die. The cold seeps up from the dirt floor. It presses down from the uninsulated roof. You bury your nose in your itchy wool blanket to preserve the warmth of your breath. You can hear the wind howling outside, clawing at the thin walls. You can hear the cow chewing its cud in the corner. You close your eyes, shivering violently until your body warmth and the warmth of the 7 people pressing against you creates a tiny microclimate of survival. You drift off, dreaming of a world where the air doesn't hurt your face. But even in sleep, you are thirsty. The salt from the breakfast bread, the sweat from the fields, the smoke in the air, it all leaves you parched. You want water, but you know better. Water is death. To survive tomorrow, you need to drink something else, something safer, something brewed. You wake up, and the first thing you notice before the cold or the flea bites is the dryness in your throat. It feels like you have swallowed a handful of the straw mattress you are sleeping on. Your lips are cracked. Your tongue feels like a piece of old felt. You are dehydrated. In the modern world, you would stumble to the kitchen faucet, turn a handle, and be rewarded with a glass of crystal clear, filtered, municipally treated water. You would drink it without a second thought. In 1325, that simple act would be an act of madness. You step outside. The village well is right there. The river is just down the hill. Water is everywhere. But you look at it with deep, instinctual suspicion. You know what goes into that river. You saw the tanner dumping his chemical sludge into it yesterday. You saw the cows standing in it. You saw your neighbor empty his chamber pot near the bank. To drink that water is to invite the bloody flux, dysentery, or a host of wriggling parasites to set up camp in your intestines. You cannot boil it every time you need a sip because fuel is precious and gathering wood takes hours. So you turn to the only safe alternative, the universal solvent of the Middle Ages: beer. You head to the local alehouse. This isn't a pub with a neon sign and a jukebox. It is simply the house of a neighbor, usually a woman known as an alewife, who has brewed a fresh batch and put up an ale stake, a long pole with a bush or broom at the end, outside her door to signal that the tap is open. You walk in. It's dark, smoky, and crowded, even in the morning. You hand over a coin, or maybe trade an egg, and receive a leather jack or a wooden mug filled with the golden nectar of survival. But let's manage your expectations. This isn't a crisp, cold lager. It is small beer, the same stuff you had for breakfast, but perhaps a slightly stronger batch if it's later in the day. It is room temperature, cloudy with yeast sediment, and tastes sour, smoky, and thick. It is less like a beverage and more like a soup that got drunk. Mainstream historical fact: the brewing process was the primary method of water purification, though medieval people didn't understand the germ theory behind it. They just knew that people who drank water got sick and died, while people who drank beer got happy and lived. The boiling of the water during the brewing mash killed the bacteria, and the alcohol prevented new bacteria from growing. It was a happy accident of chemistry that saved civilization. You take a long pull from the mug. It coats your throat. It isn't refreshing in the way ice water is, but it is life-sustaining. You feel the liquid hit your empty stomach. Almost immediately, a very faint, very gentle buzz sets in. This is your baseline state, because you drink this stuff all day. From the moment you wake up until you pass out, you exist in a state of perpetual, mild inebriation. You aren't drunk exactly. You aren't falling over or slurring your words. You are just soft. The sharp edges of reality are filed down. The cold doesn't bite quite as hard. The smell of the pigs isn't quite as offensive. The backbreaking labor feels slightly more rhythmic. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval quality control that you might witness right now. The ale conner. This was an official appointed by the manor to test the quality of the beer, and the testing method was legendary. The story goes that the ale conner would pour a puddle of ale onto a wooden bench and then sit in it wearing leather breeches. He would sit there for 30 minutes, drinking and chatting. Then he would try to stand up. If his breeches stuck to the bench, the ale was considered good. It had enough residual sugar and malt. If he slid right off, it was too watery, and the alewife would be fined. You watch a man in leather pants stand up from a bench. He sticks slightly, ripping the wood with a satisfying shh sound. The room cheers. The ale is approved. You drink with more confidence, knowing it has passed the butt test. But it's not just about the buzz, it's about the calories. This beer is unfiltered. It is full of suspended grain particles, yeast, and proteins. It is liquid bread. In a diet that often hovers on the edge of starvation, the calories from alcohol are vital. You are literally drinking your dinner. Historians still argue about the water myth, the idea that no one drank water. Revisionist historians point out that medical texts from the time actually praised water, provided it was clear, light, and free from scum. They argue that people did drink water when they had access to clean springs. But the counter-argument remains strong. In a densely populated village with livestock, clean was a relative term. If you had the choice between the stream where the ducks were pooping and a mug of sterile, caloric beer, you chose the beer every time. You finish your mug and gesture for another. You are hydrating, you are nourishing yourself. You are medicating your sore tooth and your aching back. But there is a downside. The beer belly is a very real phenomenon, even among hard-working peasants. And the constant intake of fluid means you are constantly needing to use the facilities. See Section 2, creating an endless cycle of drinking and dumping that keeps the village smelling ripe. Also, the alcohol, weak as it is, acts as a depressant. Combined with the heavy carb diet and the physical exhaustion, it contributes to the general sluggishness of village life. You aren't moving fast. You are wading through your day. As you sit there, surrounded by neighbors who are also hydrating, you realize that the alehouse is the only real community center you have. It is where news is shared, where deals are made, and where you can complain about the Lord without much fear of retribution, provided you whisper. It is the glue holding this miserable society together. Without the beer, the revolution would probably start tomorrow. But with the beer, you're just content enough to tolerate the mud for one more day. You wipe the foam from your lip. You feel warmer. The world is a little blurry around the edges, and that is exactly how you like it. You have survived the thirst. But now, as you stand up to leave, you feel a different kind of discomfort, a feverish heat that has nothing to do with the alcohol. Your head is throbbing. Your skin feels hot and dry. You are getting sick. And in the Middle Ages, getting sick means visiting a doctor who thinks the solution to having too much blood is to take some of it away. You stumble out of the alehouse, not drunk, but definitely not sober, and head toward the only man in the village who owns a sharp knife and a jar of worms. It is time to balance your humors. You stumble away from the alehouse, the world tilting slightly on its axis. It isn't the alcohol. The small beer you've been drinking all day is too weak to do this to you. No, this is something else. Your head feels like it's being squeezed in a vice. Your skin is hot to the touch, and there is a strange rhythmic thumping in your ears that sounds suspiciously like a death march. You are sick. In the modern world, you would go home, take 2 ibuprofen, drink some electrolytes, and binge watch a sitcom until you felt better. In the Middle Ages, getting sick is not a minor inconvenience. It is a terrifying existential crisis. You don't know what you have. It could be a passing flu. It could be the sweating sickness. It could be the start of the Great Plague. Every symptom is a potential death sentence. You need a doctor, or more accurately, you need the local equivalent, the barber surgeon. You find his shop by the sign hanging outside, a wooden pole painted with red and white stripes. The red represents blood, the white represents bandages. It is a literal advertising banner for "We cut you open here." You push the door open. The air inside is thick, warm, and smells of a disturbing combination of dried herbs, singed hair, and iron. The surgeon is a busy man. He cuts hair, shaves beards, pulls teeth, and sets broken bones. He is the village mechanic, but for human bodies. He sits you down on a wooden stool. He doesn't ask you to stick out your tongue. He doesn't take your temperature. Instead, he looks at you with a critical, narrowing eye. He touches your forehead with a calloused hand. Then, he asks for a urine sample. Uroscopy is the gold standard of medieval diagnosis. You provide the sample in a glass flask. The surgeon holds it up to the light, swirling it like a fine wine. He checks the color, the clarity, the sediment. He might even taste it. Yes, taste it. If it's sweet, you might have the honey urine disease, diabetes. If it's bitter, well, that's just Tuesday. He sets the flask down with a definitive clink. Imbalance, he declares. Too much blood. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval medicine was entirely dominated by the theory of the four humors, a concept inherited from the ancient Greeks, Hippocrates, and Galen. The idea was that the body contained four essential fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a state of perfect balance between them. Illness was simply an excess or deficiency of one. A fever, hot and wet, was a classic sign of a plethora or excess of blood. The logic was simple. If you have too much blood, you have to let some out. The surgeon reaches for his tools. He has a fleam, a terrifying little spring-loaded knife designed to snap into a vein, and a bowl to catch the flow. But he shakes his head. You look weak. A blade might be too much of a shock to your system. He needs something gentler, something more natural. He walks over to a large earthenware jar sitting in the corner, covered with a damp cloth. He lifts the lid. Inside, writhing in a few inches of dark water, are dozens of black, slimy shapes. Leeches. These aren't just any worms. These are Hirudo medicinalis, the European medicinal leech. They are the surgeon's prized pets. They are expensive, collected by leech gatherers, usually poor women who wade bare-legged into marshes, waiting for the creatures to latch onto their calves so they can peel them off and sell them. It is a supply chain built on human bait. The surgeon fishes one out. It is about 3 inches long, black and glistening, expanding and contracting in his fingers. He brings it toward you. You flinch. Hold still, he grumbles. This will cool your blood. He places the leech on your arm, right over a vein. For a second, nothing happens. The leech explores your skin, its head swaying back and forth like a blind sniffer dog. Then, it finds a spot. You feel a sharp, stinging prick, like a nettle sting. The leech has 3 jaws, each with a row of tiny teeth that saw through your skin in a Mercedes-Benz star pattern. It injects a natural anesthetic so you don't feel the feeding, and an anticoagulant to keep the blood flowing. It anchors itself and begins to pulse. You watch in horrified fascination as the creature swells. It turns from a slender black ribbon into a bloated gray sausage. It is drinking your life force, and you are paying for this service. There's a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval medical astrology that dictates exactly where the leech should go. It wasn't random. The zodiac man was a common diagram showing to which astrological signs governed which body parts. Aries ruled the head, Taurus the neck, Scorpio the private parts. A surgeon had to check the position of the moon before bleeding you. If the moon was in the sign of the body part he wanted to treat, he couldn't cut there, or you might bleed to death. So, if you had a headache during Aries, he might leech your foot instead to draw the bad blood away from the head. It was celestial plumbing. You sit there, feeling a strange, lightheaded sensation. Is it the blood loss, or is it the sheer psychological weight of having a parasite attached to your forearm? The surgeon nods approvingly. He believes he is venting the excess heat from your body, like opening a window in a stuffy room. Historians still argue vigorously about whether bloodletting actually helped anyone. For centuries, it was dismissed by modern science as quackery that weakened patients right when they needed strength. However, some recent scholarship suggests a nuance. In cases of extreme hypertension, high blood pressure, or hemochromatosis, iron overload, bloodletting might have temporarily reduced symptoms. It also lowered body temperature by inducing mild shock, which technically broke a fever, even if it didn't cure the infection. So, in a twisted way, it worked by making you nearly dead enough to cool down. The leech is now the size of a thumb. It is full. It drops off your arm with a wet plop, rolling onto the floor in a drunken stupor. The surgeon scoops it up and puts it back in a separate jar to digest your blood for the next 6 months. He wipes the small, star-shaped wound on your arm with a rag dipped in vinegar. It stings. He binds it with a strip of linen. "You are balanced," he announces. You don't feel balanced. You feel dizzy. You feel pale. You feel like you need to sit down for a week. But the throbbing in your head has subsided, replaced by a general, floaty weakness. The heat in your skin has faded into a clammy chill. You pay the surgeon a few coins or a promise of labor. You stagger out of the shop. The fresh air hits you. You are lighter, both physically and metaphorically. You have been purged. But purging has a cost. You have lost blood, fluids, and energy. Your body is now screaming for replacement fuel. You are hungrier than you have ever been in your life. You need salt. You need protein. You need sustenance. But you are a peasant in winter. You don't have a steak waiting for you. You have the salted meat hanging in the rafters of your hut. Meat that has been there for months. Meat that might be harboring life of its own. You head home, your stomach growling a warning. You have fixed your humors, but now you have to risk your digestion. You are about to sit down to a meal that is a masterclass in preservation, decay, and the very distinct possibility of hallucinogenic fungus. You push open the door to your hut, your head still swimming slightly from the bloodletting. The loss of blood has done exactly what the surgeon promised. It has cooled your fever, but it has also left you with a ravenous, trembling hunger. Your body is shouting for sustenance, for salt, for anything to replace what the leeches stole. You step into the gloom of your home. The fire has burned down to embers, casting long, dancing shadows against the wattle walls. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, unwashed wool, and the distinct, sharp tang of the main course hanging above your head. You look up. There, dangling from the rafters like grim decorations, are strips of meat. This is your pantry. In the modern world, you trust your refrigerator to keep your food from becoming a biology experiment. In 1325, you trust salt and smoke and luck. Preserving meat is a desperate race against time and maggots. When a pig is slaughtered, usually in November, to save on feed during the winter, nothing is wasted. The blood is made into pudding, which you already ate. The organs are consumed immediately, and the muscle meat is packed into barrels of coarse salt to draw out the moisture. It sits there for weeks, turning gray and hard as a rock. Then, it is hung in the chimney or the rafters to smoke. You reach up and unhook a piece of what you think is bacon, though it looks more like a shingle from a roof. It is stiff, covered in a layer of soot, and flecked with white crystals. You have to soak it in Warmwasser for hours just to make it edible, to leach out the very salt that saved it. But you don't have hours. You are hungry now. You toss the meat into the pottage pot hanging over the fire. It simmers, releasing a smell that is savory, but also funky. There is a fine line in medieval cuisine between aged and rotten, and you walk it every day. If the meat has gone a little green around the edges, you just cut that part off. If it smells a little sour, you add more onions. You cannot afford to throw food away. Mainstream historical fact. Salt was so vital to medieval survival that it was often the single most expensive item a peasant family had to buy. They couldn't produce it themselves unless they lived near the sea or a brine spring. The word salary comes from the Roman salarium, money given to soldiers to buy salt. You are literally eating your savings. While the meat softens, marginally, you reach for the bread. This is the other half of your meal, and tonight it is a dark, dense loaf of rye. Rye is the grain of the poor. It grows in cold, damp soil where wheat fails. It is hardy. But rye has a secret. It is prone to a parasitic fungus called Claviceps purpurea, better known as ergot. To you, the ergot just looks like a dark, slightly enlarged kernel on the stalk, maybe a bit purplish black, like a smut. When the grain is threshed and ground into flour, the fungus goes right into the dough. You can't taste it, you can't smell it, but once it is in your system, it is a chemical bomb. You tear off a chunk of the dark bread. It is chewy and bland, but it fills the void in your stomach. You dip it into the salty broth, softening the crust. As you eat, you are unwittingly participating in a game of Russian roulette that has plagued Europe for centuries. If this bread is infected, the effects won't be immediate. It starts slowly. A tingling in the fingers, a coldness in the toes. Then, a burning sensation, as if your limbs are on fire. This is the gangrenous form of ergotism, known as Saint Anthony's fire. The fungus constricts blood vessels so severely that your extremities essentially die, while still attached to your body. But there is another form, convulsive ergotism. This one attacks the central nervous system. It causes muscle spasms, seizures, and vivid, terrifying hallucinations. You might see demons. You might feel invisible bugs crawling under your skin. You might start dancing uncontrollably in the street until you collapse from exhaustion. Historians still argue vigorously about how much of medieval witchcraft and demonic possession was actually just accidental mass poisoning. Some scholars suggest that the erratic behavior of bewitched accusers in trials, like the famous ones in Salem centuries later, matches the symptoms of ergotism perfectly. Was the neighbor you saw talking to a goat actually a witch? Or did you just eat a bad sandwich in a world without microscopes? The line between biology and theology is blurry. You finish your meal. The salt from the meat stings your tongue, but the protein settles your shakes. You feel a little better. The dizziness from the bloodletting is fading, replaced by the heavy, lethargic comfort of digestion. But as you sit there by the fire, you notice something odd. The shadows in the corner of the room seem to be stretching. The grain of the wood on the table looks like it is flowing, like a river. You blink. Is it the smoke? Is it the low light? Or was that loaf of rye hiding a secret? You rub your eyes. The sensation passes. Probably just fatigue. Probably just the stress of the day. You take a swig of ale to wash down the salt. It is a hard truth of your existence. The very things that keep you alive, preserved meat, hearty grain, are constantly trying to kill you. You are fighting a war on two fronts. Against starvation and against toxicity. Every meal is a calculated risk. But tonight, you seem to have won. Your stomach is full. The fire is warm. You lean back against the wall, feeling the rough wattle press against your spine. You have survived the labor, the weather, the insects, the doctor, and the dinner. You might think the day is winding down. You might think you are free to drift off into a peaceful, carb-induced coma. But you would be wrong. Because in the medieval world, the day doesn't end when the sun goes down. It ends when the bells toll, and the bells are about to ring for vespers. You cannot just sit here and digest. You have a soul to save. The church controls your calendar, your diet, your work schedule, and your afterlife, and it requires your attention. You hear the deep, resonant bong of the church bell cutting through the night air. It vibrates in your chest. It is a summons. You pull yourself up, groaning as your stiff muscles protest. You leave the warmth of the fire and step back out into the cold darkness. You have fed the body. Now you must feed the spirit. And in the Middle Ages, the spirit is a very hungry, very demanding thing that runs on guilt and fear. You step out of your hut and into the night. The air is freezing, a sharp contrast to the smoky warmth you just left, but you don't complain. The bell is ringing, and in the medieval world, the bell is the voice of God. It doesn't ask, it commands. You join a stream of other shadows, your neighbors, trudging through the mud toward the center of the village. The church looms ahead, a massive silhouette of stone against the stars. It is the largest, most permanent thing in your life. Your house will rot and be rebuilt every generation. The church will stand forever. It is the axis upon which your entire world spins. You enter the nave. There are no pews. Pews are a modern luxury for people who expect to be comfortable while contemplating their sins. In 1325, you stand, or you kneel on the cold flagstones until your knees go numb. The air inside is heavy with incense, damp stone, and the smell of unwashed wool from 100 other peasants. You look up. The walls are not bare. They are covered in vivid, terrifying art. This is the Doom painting, a massive mural usually painted over the chancel arch. It depicts the Last Judgment in graphic, nightmarish detail. On one side, the saved are being welcomed into a golden heaven. On the other side, the side you find yourself staring at, naked sinners are being dragged by demons into the gaping maw of a hellmouth. They are being boiled in cauldrons, flayed with knives, and eaten by snakes. To a modern eye, it looks like a heavy metal album cover. To you, an illiterate peasant who has never seen a movie or a photograph, this is not art. This is a documentary. This is exactly what will happen to you if you don't pay your tithe or if you work on a saint's day. It is a terrifying, color-saturated promise of eternal pain. Mainstream historical fact. The medieval church exercised absolute control over time itself. The day wasn't divided into hours and minutes. It was divided into the canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, etc., signaled by the bells. The year wasn't marked by fiscal quarters, but by the liturgical calendar, Advent, Lent, Easter, Michaelmas. The church decided when you worked, when you rested, when you feasted, and when you fasted. You literally lived on God's time. The priest stands at the altar, his back to you. He is speaking Latin. You do not speak Latin, you speak a local dialect of Middle English or French or German. To you, the Mass is a series of magical incantations. You hear the phrase, Hoc est corpus meum, this is my body, and you bow your head. You don't understand the theology of transubstantiation, but you know that this is the moment the bread becomes God. Fun fact, the phrase hoc est corpus is widely believed to be the origin of the magician's phrase, hocus pocus, a parody of the mysterious Latin muttered by priests. But the church isn't just interested in your soul, it is deeply interested in your wallet. You think about the tithe barn at the edge of the village. It is a massive structure, often better built than your own home. Every year you are legally required to give 10% of everything you produce to the church. Not 10% of your profit, 10% of the gross. If you grow 10 bushels of wheat, the church gets 1. If you raise 10 lambs, the priest gets 1. And they are picky. They don't want the runt of the litter or the moldy grain. They want the good stuff. There are stories of priests standing by the field gate, counting every 10th sheaf of corn and marking it with a branch. It is a divine income tax, enforced by the threat of hellfire. And it doesn't stop there. There is the mortuary fee. When you die, the Lord of the Manors takes your best beast, the Harriet, and the church takes your second best beast. So, your grieving widow is left with a funeral to plan, and 2 fewer cows to survive the winter. Historians still argue vigorously about the role of the church in peasant life. Was it a tyrannical institution that exploited the poor to build cathedrals and fund the lavish lifestyles of bishops? Or was it the only social safety net available, providing alms to the destitute, hospitals for the sick, and a sense of community and meaning in a brutal world? The records show both. The church took your grain, but it also gave out bread in times of famine. It terrified you with doom paintings, but it also promised you that your suffering had a purpose. As you kneel on the stone, you probably feel a mix of resentment and desperate gratitude. You watch the priest move through the candlelight. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about church staffing that catches your eye: the dog whipper. Yes, that was an actual job title. In medieval churches, stray dogs would often wander in, attracted by the warmth or the smell of the communion bread. They might fight, bark, or urinate on the pillars. So, the church employed a man with a whip, and sometimes a set of wooden tongs, to physically remove the canine interlopers. You watch a man in the corner chase a terrier out the door. It adds a moment of slapstick to the solemnity. The service ends. You are blessed, sprinkled with holy water, and sent back out into the dark. You feel spiritually cleansed, or at least terrified enough to behave for another week. But as you walk home, you realize that the church's control extends far beyond the building. It is in your bedroom, where sex is strictly regulated. No intimacy on feast days, fast days, or Sundays, which rules out about 40% of the year. It is in your diet. No meat during Lent. It is in your mind. You pass the graveyard. You cross yourself. You don't just fear death. You fear the bad death, dying without the last rites. If you die suddenly in the fields, unconfessed, your soul is in limbo. You spend your life trying to ensure a good death, surrounded by candles and clergy. You reach your hut. The fire is banked. The family is asleep. You crawl back into the straw. You are tired, hungry, and lighter in the pocket than you would like. But there is one person in this hut who has it harder than you. One person whose day has been longer, harder, and more dangerous than any field work you did. You look at your wife, sleeping next to the baby. If you think being a medieval peasant man is hard, being a medieval peasant woman is a survival sport. She faces all the same cold, hunger, and disease, plus the lethal lottery of childbirth and the crushing weight of domestic labor that never, ever ends. Tomorrow, while you are in the fields, she will be fighting a different kind of war. A war against dirt, spoilage, and the statistical improbability of keeping a child alive past the age of 5. You wake up before the sun does. The rooster hasn't even cleared its throat yet, and the rest of the family is still snoring in a heap of limbs and wool. But your day started 5 minutes ago. You are a medieval woman, and that means you are the first to rise, the last to sleep, and the only thing standing between your family and total chaos. You crawl out of the straw, trying not to wake the baby. The fire has died down, so your first task is to coax the embers back to life. You kneel in the ash, blowing until your head spins, feeding the glow with precious twigs until a flame catches. The house begins to warm up, but you don't have time to enjoy it. You have to get water. You grab the yoke and the 2 wooden buckets. The walk to the well is cold and dark. The buckets, when full, weigh about 40 pounds. You haul them back, your shoulders burning. You will do this trip 4 or 5 times today. Water for cooking, water for the animals, water for cleaning. You are essentially a human pipeline. Then comes the grain. Before anyone can eat bread, someone has to grind the flour. You sit at the quernstone, 2 heavy slabs of rock, and begin to turn the handle. It is monotonous, back-breaking work. Grind, grind, grind. The sound of stone on stone is the soundtrack of your morning. Your arms ache. Your palms are calloused. You are processing the raw fuel for the entire household. Mainstream historical fact. The term spinster, which eventually came to mean an unmarried woman, originally just described a woman's occupation. Spinning wool into thread was the universal female task. It was so ubiquitous that the female side of the family was called the distaff side, named after the tool used to hold the unspun wool. Whenever you weren't cooking, cleaning, or farming, you were expected to be spinning. A woman with idle hands was considered a moral failure. So, while the pottage simmers, which you also made, and the baby cries, whom you are soothing, you have a drop spindle in your hand. You are spinning thread to make the clothes that keep everyone from freezing. You are the manufacturer, the chef, the cleaner, and the supply chain manager. But the domestic grind is just the background noise. The real terror of your life is biological. You look at your belly, you are pregnant again. In the modern world, a pregnancy announcement is a joyous occasion involving ultrasound photos and gender reveal parties that accidentally set forests on fire. In 1325, it is a somber realization. You are about to enter the battlefield. Childbirth is the leading cause of death for women your age. There are no hospitals. There are no doctors. Men are generally banned from the birthing chamber. There are only midwives, experienced local women who bring herbs, amulets, and a lot of prayers. When the time comes, you will be confined. The windows will be shut tight to keep out drafts and demons. You might be encouraged to drink wine mixed with ant eggs or wear a charm made of weasel skin. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval birthing aids that illustrates the desperation: birthing girdles. These were long strips of parchment or silk inscribed with prayers and the names of saints that were wrapped around the laboring woman's waist. Some churches actually owned relic girdles believed to be the belt of the Virgin Mary that they would rent out to wealthy women. If you were poor, you might just use a piece of rope that a monk had blessed, or perhaps a belt made of wolfskin to give you strength. You fear the lying-in period, not just for the pain, which is excruciating and unmitigated, but for the infection that often follows. Puerperal fever, childbed fever, strikes without warning. It is a bacterial infection caused by lack of hygiene. One day you are holding your new baby. 3 days later, you are burning with fever, delirious, and fading fast. And then there is the baby itself. You look at the infant sleeping in the wooden cradle by the fire. You love him with a fierce, terrifying intensity, but you try not to love him too much. You try to guard your heart. Why? Because the statistics are against him. Roughly 1 in 3 children will not see their 5th birthday. They die of everything. Overlaying, suffocating in the shared bed, accidents near the fire, dysentery, measles, or simply failure to thrive. You have probably already buried a child. Maybe 2. The grief is a heavy stone you carry in your chest while you spin, while you grind, while you walk to the well. You don't talk about it much. Everyone carries the same stone. It is just part of the landscape, like the rain or the taxes. Historians still argue vigorously about the indifference hypothesis, the idea that medieval parents didn't bond with their children because they expected them to die. Philippe Ariès famously argued in the 1960s that childhood as a concept didn't exist and parents were emotionally detached. However, most modern historians reject this. Evidence from coroners' rolls, reports on accidental deaths, shows parents frantically trying to save drowning children or weeping over small graves. The grief was real. It was just commonplace. So, you protect this new baby with everything you have. You swaddle him tightly in linen bands, turning him into a little mummy, because it is believed this helps his limbs grow straight. You hang a piece of red coral around his neck to ward off the evil eye. You never leave him alone, lest the fairies come and swap him for a changeling. And amidst this life and death struggle, you are also a partner in the economic survival of the farm. You don't just stay inside. During the harvest, you are out in the fields alongside your husband, swinging a sickle, binding sheaves. You brew the ale that the family drinks and sells. You raise the chickens. You make the cheese. Legally, you are a femme covert, covered by your husband's identity. You cannot own land or sign contracts without him, unless you are a widow or a femme sole merchant in a city. But in reality, the household economy collapses without you. You are the deputy husband. When he is away performing forced labor for the Lord, you run the farm. You handle the money. You make the decisions. The sun begins to set. The men return from the fields, exhausted and hungry. You serve them the food you cooked. You pour the ale you brewed. You mend the tunic you spun. You are the first to rise and the last to sit. Your hands are never still. Your body is a vessel for life and a shield against death. You sit by the fire for a moment, picking up your spindle again. The rhythm is soothing. Spin, twist, wind. You look at your husband, snoring on the straw. You look at the baby. You look at the dark corners of the hut where the drafts sneak in. You are tired in a way that goes down to the bone, but you are also made of iron. You have survived childbirth. You have survived famine. You have survived the crushing weight of a world that regards you as secondary, yet relies on you for everything. But survival has a cost. You look at your hands in the firelight. They are wrinkled, scarred, and aged far beyond your 22 years. And outside, the world is not getting any safer. You hear shouting in the street, the sound of a brawl spilling out of the alehouse. Violence is the other constant in your life. It isn't just the threat of disease or hunger. It is the threat of a fist, a knife, or a law that doesn't protect you. Tomorrow, you will wake up and do it all again. But tonight, you have to listen to the sound of men fighting in the dark and hope the chaos doesn't come knocking on your door. So far, you have battled filth, starvation, social injustice, and the ever-present threat of childbirth. But just when you think your day can't get any worse, here comes violence, loud, bloody, and often completely acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were not peaceful. The idea of law and order mostly meant hoping the local lord wasn't in a bad mood. Violence is everywhere, in the home, in the streets, on the battlefield, in church disputes, and sometimes even in line at the communal bread oven. Crime is common, punishment is brutal, and justice is more performance art than protection. Let's start with the petty stuff. Steal a loaf of bread? You could lose a hand. Accused of lying, your tongue might be pierced with a hot iron. Gossip too much? Meet the scold's bridle, a metal mask strapped to your head with a bar in your mouth to depress your tongue, for correction, of course. If you're accused of something serious, heresy, theft, witchcraft, how do you prove your innocence? By being tortured, obviously. Welcome to Trial by Ordeal. One version is the ordeal of boiling water. You stick your hand into a cauldron of scalding water to retrieve a stone. The wound is bandaged. 3 days later, it is inspected by a priest. If it is healing cleanly, God has protected you, and you are innocent. If it is infected, which, spoiler alert, it almost certainly will be because it's a burn wound in a filthy world, you are guilty. Another option is the ordeal of cold water. You are tied up and tossed into a river or pond. If you sink, the water has accepted you, meaning you are innocent, and hopefully someone fishes you out before you drown. If you float, the water has rejected you, meaning you are guilty, and you will be fished out and punished anyway. It is like a medieval game show where the prize is survival and the host is actively rooting against you. And if you are sentenced to death, that's a public event. Executions are performed in the town square in front of cheering crowds. Hangings, beheadings, burnings. Sometimes people bring snacks. It is the medieval equivalent of cable TV. The body is often left on display as a warning, rotting on the gibbet for weeks until the birds pick it clean. But state-sponsored violence is just the tip of the iceberg. Interpersonal violence is rampant. Domestic violence is completely normal. Husbands were legally allowed, even expected, to discipline their wives and children physically. If a neighbor insults you, you don't sue him, you hit him with a shovel. Street fights are commonplace. You could be beaten just for looking the wrong way at a noble's horse. And then there is war. War is always simmering. Local feuds between barons, territorial disputes, religious crusades. Someone is always marching off to stab someone else in the name of honor, God, or boredom. If an army marches through your village, they don't just pass through, they forage. That means they take your food, burn your house if they feel like it, and maybe kill you for sport. being a civilian in a war zone is a death sentence. Violence isn't a breakdown of society in the Middle Ages. It is society. Everyone lives with the constant knowledge that life is fragile, justice is arbitrary, and your neighbor might bash your head in over a pig. So, walk carefully, keep your eyes down, and never trust anyone with a club. You have navigated the dangers of the day, but now comes the final, inevitable chapter of most medieval lives. An early and unglamorous death. If you are alive and still breathing past the age of 40, you are practically a celebrity. You might even be referred to as the Old One, which is less of a nickname and more of a statistical miracle. Let's break it down. The average life expectancy hovers around 30-40 years, but that number is dragged down heavily by infant mortality. Nearly half of all children died before reaching age 5. Disease, malnutrition, or one bad winter was all it took. No vaccines, no antibiotics, no hope. If you survived childhood, you entered adulthood already exhausted. Work began as soon as you could walk upright, and by 25 your joints creaked like a monastery door. You might be missing several teeth, a finger, and most of your original optimism. For men, the dangers were varied but relentless. Farming accidents, scythes are sharp, infections from minor wounds, tetanus is everywhere, a neighbor's drunken rage, a crusade gone sideways. Even walking to the market could be risky if you crossed paths with a bored bandit or an angry tax collector. Death could also come quietly from the plague, which turned cities into cemeteries overnight, or from famine, which could last entire seasons, thinning out entire villages, or from bad luck, like eating spoiled grain and spending your final hours hallucinating and screaming at the walls. In funerals, you were lucky if you got one. Bodies were often buried quickly to avoid disease. No embalming, no polished coffins, just a hole, a few murmured prayers, and a shallow mound of earth, if there was enough space left in the churchyard. So yes, in medieval times, life was brutal, short, and constantly under siege by death in all its casual forms. You didn't retire, you just stopped to go what's up. You have survived the cradle, the plow, the plague, and the pillory. You have dodged the arrows of war and the invisible arrows of disease. You are now 45 years old. In the modern world, 45 is the prime of life. You are thinking about your 401k, maybe buying a convertible, or worrying about your cholesterol. In the Middle Ages, if you reach 45, you are a biological marvel. You are a walking, breathing defiance of the odds. You are a senior citizen, but don't expect a discount at the alehouse. Your body is the ledger where the costs of survival have been recorded. Every harvest is etched into your spine. Every winter is trapped in your knuckles. You don't just wake up stiff. You wake up feeling like your bones have fused together during the night. Arthritis isn't a diagnosis. It's just the sensation of being alive. Let's talk about your vision. You can't see the details of your work anymore. Presbyopia, farsightedness caused by the hardening of the lens, hits everyone eventually. In the future, you would buy a pair of reading glasses from a drugstore rack. Here, unless you are a wealthy scholar with access to a reading stone, a polished beryl crystal, you simply go blind to the small things. You can't mend the nets. You can't sew the hem. You become dependent on the young eyes of your grandchildren. And then there is the retirement plan. You don't have a pension. You don't have Social Security. You have children. If you are a peasant with land, you might enter into a formal maintenance agreement with your eldest son. This is a legal contract, often recorded in the manor court rolls. You agree to hand over the farm and the plow to him now, before you die. In exchange, he agrees to let you live in the west room of the cottage and provides you with a specific allowance: a loaf of bread a day, a gallon of ale, a new tunic once a year, and fuel for your fires. It sounds cozy, but it is a gamble. You are betting that your son won't get tired of feeding a non-productive mouth. There are court records of elderly parents suing their children for failing to honor the agreement, for starving them, or for kicking them out into the cold. It is a grim reality. Your security depends entirely on whether you raised a decent human being. Mainstream historical fact. For the wealthier classes, or those with cash but no heirs, there was another option: the corrody. This was essentially a medieval annuity. You paid a lump sum of money or land to a monastery. In return, the monks promised to take care of you for the rest of your life. You got a room in the abbey, daily meals, and spiritual insurance. It was a popular way to retire, but it was also a gamble for the monks. If you died next week, they made a profit. If you lived to be 80, you were a financial drain on the brotherhood. But let's assume you are still in the village. You are now the old one. Your role shifts. You can no longer swing the scythe, so you watch the babies. You can no longer haul the wood, so you tend the fire. You become the keeper of memory. You know when the last famine was. You know where the boundary stones are buried. You know the genealogies of the cows. You are respected to a degree, but you are also vulnerable. Historians still argue vigorously about the status of the elderly in the Middle Ages. Some scholars, following the Golden Age theory, argue that elders were revered for their wisdom and held high status in the village hierarchy. Others point to brutal literary depictions and sermons that mock the old as useless, miserly, and physically repulsive. The truth is likely stark. You were respected as long as you had property. Once you handed over the land, you were living on borrowed time and goodwill. You spend your days sitting by the hearth, trying to soak up heat that your thin blood can no longer generate. Your teeth are gone or going, so you dip your bread in pottage until it dissolves. You sleep little, waking often to the aches in your joints and the cold in the room. And you prepare for the end. Death is not a taboo subject here. It is the roommate who has been waiting in the corner your whole life. You have seen it take your parents, your friends, your children. You know what it looks like. You are not afraid of the dying part, the pain, the fever. You are afraid of the spiritual logistics. You worry about purgatory. You worry about your sins. You spend your remaining coins buying candles for the altar, hoping to bribe the saints into putting in a good word for you. You practice the ars moriendi, the art of dying. This was a set of instructions on how to die well, forgiving your enemies, confessing your faults, and accepting your fate without despair. There is a quirky fringe tidbit about medieval longevity that offers a glimmer of hope. If you survived childhood, and if you survived the dangerous childbearing years for women, or the war or accident-prone years for men, you could actually live quite a long time. It wasn't uncommon to find people in their 60s or 70s in a village. They were survivors, tough as old leather, immune to everything but time itself. But you are tired. The world is loud, cold, and hard. You have worked from the moment you could walk. You have been hungry more often than you have been full. You have been cold more often than you have been warm. You look at your hands resting on your knees. They are map of your life. The scar on your thumb from the harvest of 1310. The crooked finger broken in a tavern brawl. The dirt ingrained so deep it is part of your skin. You realize that you are ready, not for death necessarily, but for rest, for a sleep that doesn't end with a rooster crowing or a bailiff shooting, for a place where the wind doesn't blow through the walls. You close your eyes. The sounds of the village fade. The smell of the smoke becomes less choking, more comforting. You are just a tired traveler at the end of a very long, very muddy road. You have lasted, you have endured, and now you are done. So, you've made it to the end of your medieval life. You've battled the cold, the hunger, the church, the work, and the fleas. You've seen the seasons turn more times than most, and now you are old, tired, and ready for whatever comes next. But as your medieval consciousness begins to fade, you suddenly open your eyes. The musty smell of straw and wood smoke is gone. The biting cold that lived in your bones has vanished. You are lying on something incredibly soft. You blink. Above you is a smooth white ceiling, not a thatch roof crawling with spiders. You reach out and touch a duvet. It is light, fluffy, and clean. You shift your weight, and the mattress beneath you gives way gently, supporting your back in a way no straw sack ever did. You sit up. The room is warm, not because there is a smoky fire in the center of the floor, but because invisible pipes in the walls are circulating hot water, or a machine is blowing heated air. You are in a climate-controlled box. You swing your legs out of bed. Your feet touch a carpet, soft and dry. You walk to a room with a porcelain throne that flushes away your waste with clean, drinkable water. You turn a tap, and hot water pours out, magic that would have made a medieval king weep with envy. You open a refrigerator. It is full of food, fresh fruit in winter, meat that hasn't been salted into a rock, milk that hasn't curdled, spices that would have cost a fortune in 1325 are sitting in a jar, forgotten in the back. You realize with a jolt that you are back in the modern world. It's easy to romanticize the past. We look at castles and cathedrals and think of a simpler time. But the reality was a relentless grind of survival. The simple life was complicated by disease, discomfort, and danger at every turn. You wouldn't last a day in the Middle Ages because you have been spoiled by progress. And that is a good thing. You have antibiotics, you have anesthesia, You have rights. You have a life expectancy that isn't a coin toss. So the next time you complain about your Wi-Fi being slow or your coffee being lukewarm, remember the pottage. Remember the chamber pot. Remember the toothworm. Be grateful for your boredom. Be grateful for your safety. Be grateful for the soft, clean bed you are about to fall asleep in. The medieval world was a forge that hammered humanity into shape, but you don't have to live in the fire anymore. You get to rest. And as the images of the muddy village fade, replaced by the quiet comfort of your own room, let your breathing slow down. The work is done. The fields are plowed. The fire is banked. You are safe. You are warm. You are clean. The history is behind you, a story to be told, not a life to be endured. You can let go of the struggle now. Let the heavy wool blanket of sleep pull you down deeper and deeper into a dream where the sun is always warm and the bread is always soft. Good night.